Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, angels and demons, monsters and serpents, to Brothers of the Serpent podcast, coming to you not live from not the 10 by 10 by 10 tangent cube of science,
but a cave where no man has ever entered.
Yeah, so our internet connection has been down in the tangent cube for the past couple of weeks, so we are forced to do this from a cave that has a better internet connection than where we live. So anyway, today we have something special. We've got Joshua Cutchin with us. He has written many books. One of my favorites is A Trojan Feast. We're going to be talking to him about that and many other topics. He goes on Where Did the Road Go podcast quite often. He's been a guest on many other podcasts. And his discussions with Soraya and Micah Hanks and so on and so forth are one of the reasons we started. It inspired us to start this podcast. So, Josh, thanks so much for coming and being on the podcast with us, man. This is great.
It's an absolute pleasure. Don't say too much that I'm on Where Did the Road Go very often, because Soraya's going to be really mad. I keep on appearing on other shows. It's been a while since I've been on there regularly, but I want to get back to it. It's just he does things late at night, and I'm exhausted with these twins.
Right?
These 3-month-old twins. So, it's great. Absolutely great to be here.
I remember you were saying you had twins. I was like, oh man, that's going to be awesome and really hard, but awesome. Yeah.
That's a pretty good summation of it. Awesome and really hard.
Yeah. Also, you're a tuba player, which I know, of course, because I've listened to you on many podcasts. That's awesome. We're also musicians.
That's awesome. What do you guys play?
I play like a little bit of guitar. I played trumpet for 9 years. I was in DCI.
Awesome. Which corps?
I was in Southwinds because we lived in Georgia at the time, so we were never top of the line, but it was fun. We got to the finals in Boston the year that I was there. Kyle plays everything. He's one of those guys.
I don't play the tuba.
Yeah, he has yet to learn the tuba, but he will eventually, probably.
I wish I would have refreshed my memory, but the name of your band that.
Soraya played it as an outro music on the last podcast you did with him on Where Did the Road Go? It's fantastic.
Yeah, that was a half dozen brass band, but you know how these things come and go with bands. So that group's not together any longer, but I've got a sort of similar group that I'm actually not the band leader in, which is a relief. That's always like hurting cats. So, the other group is called Funk Cake.
Awesome. Yeah, the funky tuba.
Funk Cake.
Can't get enough funky tuba.
Well, I'll just tell you that I listened to that entire album, the Half Dozen Brass Band, whatever album's on YouTube.
Oh no way! That's awesome, man.
Yeah, he heard the song. He heard the song at the end of Where Did the Road Go? And he was like, "Holy shit, this is badass!" And he went and got the entire album.
Nice. Yeah. As a tuba player, we don't usually get that sort of feedback. So
yeah, dude,
I appreciate it, man.
It's awesome, man, and your work is great.
Thank you.
I have a good friend that plays bass guitar on like these funky tunes that we come up with randomly on the weekends, and something about like really good funky bass makes me laugh.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. No, it's like it's the best. I like it when it's welcome to the music podcast, everybody.
Right.
But I really gravitate towards stuff where I can hear actual individual lines doing things. So stuff. I mean, to put that sort of in like a sort of quick idea of what I'm talking about for people listening. Stuff like Stevie Wonder, where you can hear a distinct bass line and there's this distinct horn riff, and there's this when you can hear all that really laid out clearly. That's really what appeals to me. And
absolutely,
funky bass lines are where it's at, man.
That's right,
buddy. It's great stuff.
Yeah, I also was a DJ. I still have all the equipment and still can do it. But for years, I spun for parties and at clubs and stuff. And I preferred the funky bass. There's just nothing that gets asses on the floor like funky bass.
That's true. That's true.
All right, so I want to start this with I'm going to steal a question from Gordon White's podcast, Rune Soup, and ask Josh, were you a weird kid?
Oh, so I get a second pass at this now.
Yeah.
Because the first time Gordon asked me, I was like, oh, it was Gordon. Yeah. So I think I was. I wasn't as weird as a lot of people were. I never really had an imaginary friend. I didn't, talk about seeing dead relatives or anything that dramatic. But in terms of my interests, I always had this real leaning towards, esoterica. And, I think my real gateway drug was that I was I was a monster movie kid. It was like, if it was a monster movie, I'd be all about it. So, even if the movie was crap, as long as it was a really cool monster design, I'd gravitate towards that. So I was probably the only, fifth grader at the time who knew, like, who Stan Winston was. That was sort of like, my sort of ballywick. But my family had always really not shied away, even though I grew up in a Christian household, really not shied away from talking about just weird stuff. The idea that ghosts didn't exist was kind of silly, and we always entertained the idea of some stuff like Bigfoot, which is, we thought of them in a different way than I think of those things now, but they were never a taboo subject.
Right.
In terms of like anomalous stuff that happened to me when I was a kid, the most profound thing that I can ever say, and I'm saying kids, so that this is pre going off to college, because I had some strange stuff here and there with that. But actually, in terms of my household growing up, my parents were adding on to part of their house, and for a while, we would during the construction time, we would find little stacks of 4 quarters, always 4 quarters, always stacked. And we'd find them like behind a dictionary that we hadn't looked behind in years, or on top of the fridge, just these really random places. Which,
that's cool.
Thinking what I do now about the paranormal, and thinking about, what it means to be in sort of a time of change, and how these sort of things tend to manifest and gravitate towards that, I think maybe there might have been something anomalous to it. But even so, that's not very dramatic.
Right.
4 quarters is not, I saw a ghost come out and, tell me the grandma's secret recipe or something. That's not, it's not quite the same.
Right. But you're talking about liminal states, and when weird things happen during liminal, because you're changing the house, right? That's what you're talking about? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I totally agree. That I've always thought that it's times of change that strange things happen. But it's also, how much do you think that might be that during times of change, because the structure is gone, people are more apt to notice strange things taking place?
I think strange things happen to us all the time. Yeah. Every day. It's just, I just think it's something that happens a lot more often than we notice. I was up at 5 a.m. this morning feeding a baby, and I caught something out of the corner of my eye, and I looked and there wasn't anything there, and I said, well, it's probably nothing. But I think maybe some portion of that sort of thing can be something. It's only when we actually happen to catch it that it is something genuine.
Right.
And the other thing is you are in a different mindset, which is sort of what you're getting at. You are in a different mindset when your life is disrupted by these moments of change and of transition as well. It's like someone told me interestingly one time, our lives tend to gravitate towards being like a triangle with the wide base on the bottom. But whenever that sort of triangle is inverted and it's standing on its tip, it has the most room for things to change. And I think that's what happens, is that your triangle gets put on its tip during these times. And that's when, because things are so undefined, you sort of have a lot of room to go one way or the other.
Well, this is a podcast about ancient mysteries, so pyramid. You put the pyramid on the tip. Okay.
Yeah, pyramid power is a real thing. I've had some friends talk to me about skeptically doing a pyramid power project for a science fair, and the banana that wasn't under the pyramid was fine, and the one wasn't fine rather, and the one that was under the pyramid was was edible. So
yeah,
who knows? I don't know what to make of that.
Yeah, I don't know what to make of that.
To completely discount it.
yeah, I don't know what to make of that stuff either. But we just use pyramid as a sort of a euphemism for all ancient anomalous structures. So
I also feel like the times that weird, anomalous, perhaps supernatural things happen to me in my life were like, it might have been triggered by one thing that got my attention. And then once I started paying attention, I started noticing more and more and more and more.
Yeah.
And it's like, the more you notice, like I would go through these phases. I can look back on my life where there were periods in my life where maybe it was change, or maybe it was some mental state that I was in, and I was sort of following some path, and a lot of seemingly supernatural things were happening around me that I noticed and, took note of or wrote them down in a journal. And then I might get busy or preoccupied with other things, and then those occurrences would sort of fizzle out.
No, so the preoccupation thing, look, I'm a musician. I have lots of hippie friends, so this is not a pejorative thing. But I think there's a reason that a lot of people who tend to live these anti-structure lifestyles have more experiences with these things, is because they're not bothered by a lot of the, minutia and day-to-day BS that the rest of us have chosen, for lack of a better term, to deal with. And I think that it's when you've got the HOA complaining to you about your lawn not being mowed, or you need to pressure wash your driveway. That sort of thing, it's a different sort of consciousness that you need to set yourself into to deal with that.
That's true.
Yeah, I'd agree with that 100%. I look back to the times in my life where I had weirdness happen, and it was almost always around some sort of major life change or some sort of major conflict. I'll never forget, I had a girlfriend that my mom was not keen on, and I get along with my parents really well, so that obviously created a lot of friction and a lot of arguing and unpleasant conversations during that time. And I'll never forget, it was really strange because I just finished having an argument with my mom in my bedroom at my folks' place. I was staying with them. It was after a family vacation. My bedroom sits underneath the kitchen, and I heard what sounded just like someone dropping a ball bearing above onto the floor, because you can hear everything. People.
Yeah.
Whenever I'm staying at home, my parents are like waiting until I get up to make breakfast, because you can hear everything when you're in my room. It sounded just like somebody dropping a ball bearing and it bouncing on the floor. And I got up, and the dissatisfaction that I had with my parents was sort of trumped by how weird this was. And I talked to them like, "Did you hear this?" Just in the kitchen, because their bedroom is right next to the kitchen. Didn't hear it at all. But I distinctly heard that, and it wasn't, like it was in that sort of hypnagogic, half asleep, half awake thing. This was full waking consciousness. Of course, then I found out years later that that's actually a really specific type of attribute in poltergeist phenomena, especially in like Southeast Asia, which I don't know what that thing is. But the sound of a marble dropping is something that happens sometimes in paranormal phenomena or manifestations. And again, I was joking with my colleague Tim Renner, who I saw this past week, that I often think that I'm kind of paranormal kryptonite. Like, I don't have this sort of thing happen to me time to time, but every now and then something peeks through, especially when there's a lot of, turmoil or change in my life.
Yeah. Yeah. You telling that story reminded me of, I was young. I was like, 15 maybe, or 16 or something. And so we were still living back in our family home where we grew up in Georgia, and kind of out in the woods. And my best friend at the time was over there. Everyone else was gone. Kyle was gone. Parents were gone. So we just had the house to ourselves. And it was a big, weird kind of house. Tongue and groove floors. It was like 2.5 floors. So like there was the bottom floor, and then there was a second floor, and then there was there were these lofts and stuff. So it was a half of a third floor. But anyway, we were on the second floor in the den where the TV was, and it was late at night, pitch black, so it's in the middle of the woods in Georgia. And we're watching something on TV, some anime, cartoon or whatever, probably. Mm-hmm. And, we're just sitting there watching, and then suddenly the floor beneath us, there's no one there. And the house is all locked up. There's no one there. It's been totally quiet. We're watching this movie, and suddenly the whole floor beneath us is like boom, like something hit the floor really hard from the downstairs area. Scared the hell out of both of us, and we both jumped up. We were like, "What the hell is that?" And we go running down the stairs to see if we could. And the house is pitch black. We go running down the stairs, turning on every light on the way down there, and there was nothing there. And it never happened again. But I just remember that, it couldn't be explained as something, if it's on the floor above you, you could be like, well, some bookshelf fell over. I don't know, something hit the floor or whatever. But this was it hit the floor from beneath us. and hard enough because it was a tongue and groove floor, old style house or whatever. That when it hit the floor underneath us, we felt it. It made us jump. So yeah. And I've never been able to figure out what that was, and it scared the hell out of us. So
actually, that's a really common poltergeist thing too. Is the sound of something where it sounds like there was. I mean, not just raps, but like the idea that this was so loud. There's no way that it could not have damaged the house. And
right. Yeah.
There's nowhere that you've seen where it's damaged. I got to ask you. So that's one thought. The other thought is that I was talking with somebody about this the other day. You can talk to the staunchest materialist materialist hard science sort of person, and you ask them if anything strange has ever happened. They'll say, "Oh, no."
Yeah.
But you talk to them for a while, and they sort of start to go, "Well, there was that one thing, but it was just this or just that."
Right. Somebody probably broke into the house, scared the hell out of me as a kid, and then ran away when I come running down the stairs.
Exactly.
Right,
Which I mean is possible, but that's not.
Yeah.
What can I ask? Can I ask where in Georgia you grew up?
Yeah. So we were. It was Fortson, so it was like near Columbus.
Okay.
A couple hours south of Atlanta. Yeah.
Yeah. I sort of go ish that way sometimes when visiting some of my wife's family in Alabama.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Yeah. It's a beautiful area.
Right near Fort Benning.
Right. Yeah. It's close to Fort Benning. Yeah. Yeah. So it was a weird experience. And, that same house was very strange. The whole house was very strange. It was built out of, you want to talk about poltergeist potential. It was built out of you couldn't do this today because of code, but it was built out of repurposed materials from an old factory that had burned down, basically.
Yeah.
Like the brick, the center of the house was a brick wall, and we could see the pattern, or the brick wall was beautiful, but you could tell that they were repurposed bricks. They had old
paint
and tar still on them from where they had been used for whatever in the factory, and that was the core of the house. And I remember seeing, I guess what you would call will-o'-the-wisp type lights. Like there was a sort of a living room area, a big great room area that it was lined with windows that looked out onto the sort of the side yard that just looked out into the woods. Basically, there was a little bit of grass, and then there was woods back there, and this blue light went floating across. And there was another time when it was just me and some of my friends, and we saw that, and we thought somebody was out there with a flashlight, but it was distinctly like an
orb.
Yes, like an orb that was kind of drifting along, and fortunately we didn't follow it into the woods and never be seen again, because that's what usually happens.
That's the old folklore. But yeah, man, I'm jealous. I have been in places where supposedly there are ghost lights, mystery lights, and I haven't seen much of anything. So I'm super jealous that you were able to have that experience.
Right. But also remember, we lived there for what?
14
years.
That's true.
Only saw it that one time. Yeah. I'll never forget it. But yeah, so maybe you need to stay somewhere for 14 years before you see it. That's a long time to sit there and wait for an orb to show up.
Well, it's like, and I think that this line of thinking has been downplayed in scientific circles because it's a little bit too simplistic. But as far as I understand it, the conceptually it still stands that I could theoretically put my hand through a table if the atoms align enough, because we're mostly empty space. So it doesn't surprise me that something like that might be like a one in every 14 years sort of one-off. Right. I think especially if you look at a lot of this cryptozoology stuff about these flying creatures and strange monsters and whatnot that appear once during one small period of time, like one summer in 1973 in Bumblenut, Texas, or whatever. You're not, and if you're approaching that and saying, "Well, I wonder where this flesh and blood creature went," I don't think that's the way this works. I think it's a one-off. When it's a one-off, it's just a one-off. If you're not going to find tracks and turds from that thing, I don't think.
It's quantum Sam Squanch, right?
Quantum Sam Squanch, yeah. On the flip side, I hate it when people say quantum.
I know, that's why I said it. I heard you.
Thank you.
I heard you on the last, again, I'm telling people, go listen to the Where Did the Road Go? First of all, listen to the last one with Josh, and he was like, we try not to say quantum Sasquatch. So I'm like, I've got to say it when we talk to him.
Thanks. Your iTunes rating will be following. That's good.
Oh man, yeah. So you have been doing work on cryptids, right? You've been, I don't know much about it, but you've been doing some work on that kind of stuff, on basically weird creature sightings. Is that right?
Yeah, you kind of start off, all this stuff is kind of like a drug, because you start off and be like, what if aliens are coming to Earth and there's a giant undiscovered monkey in the woods, and then you listen to enough of it, and if after 7 years you're not saying where the sex-crazed Sasquatch coming from Zebel Ganubi, then you're not listening to
you're not paying enough attention.
Stuff. Yeah. You keep on having to like push that envelope. It's like watching increasingly more perverse pornography or something. You just keep pushing that envelope to get your fix. And but at the same time, I think that I want to hear the crazier stories, but they don't always resonate with me. But at the same time, you do realize after some time that this is not as simplistic as people would want to believe. And that's sort of where I wound up with Bigfoot. Very, very, very begrudgingly. Because, I grew up, as a lot of kids do, with an interest in some of this stuff. I was, checking out Bigfoot books in the library, and, the first books that I ever had on these topics were Bigfoot books. In fact, the book that sort of set me off to write a Trojan Feast was a Bigfoot book, because that was, it made sense to me that it's a flesh and blood monkey in the woods. But then you start hearing this other stuff, and you start seeing things that people are attributing to Sasquatch that have stuff in common with the alien abduction experience and the poltergeist experience and the fairy encounters. And some of it's just absolutely nuts, and it's a little bit too coincidental for it to be unrelated. And if it's related, well, that sort of throws that ape man thing out the window. For example, there's a reference in a book from Bert Sykes called British Goblins. This is just from the actual book itself is from 1880. And he mentions in there that you mentioned the will-o'-the-wisps. Among the will-o'-the-wisps, there was a peculiar version that, quote unquote, in his words, the Negroes of the American South have appended to this will-o'-the-wisp, and they call it the jack-o'-lantern. When all this tracks, all this makes sense. It can appear either as a light or as a large hairy ape man that roams by leaps and bounds. And you go, well, that sounds a lot like Bigfoot, and that leaps and bounds thing appears in so much of this cryptozoological literature.
That's true.
That I can't dismiss those similarities. So I personally have come to the conclusion that we are at least looking at something that sometimes uses the imagery of a large hairy ape in the woods. Because I want it to be a giant monkey so we can capture it, and so we can find out about it, and so that people will stop, so that I can laugh in people's faces. But I don't think that's the way these things work, really.
Right.
And if there is a population of monkey men running around out there, it's going to be really, really small.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I have to, you have to believe these people, and you talk to these people at conferences, and they don't seem crazy, and they seem very level-headed about what they've seen. And, even the people who are like really strong, staunch advocates of these materialist interpretations of something like Bigfoot, that it is a giant, undiscovered primate. You get them to the conference bar and you get a couple of beers in them, and they'll start talking to you about weird stuff too.
Right.
It's the same way with UFO stuff. The people who think that it's little aliens coming down. Well, yeah, one of my cases, she was she ended up moving a spoon across a table. It's like, wait a minute,
what does that have to do with aliens?
Yeah. if you're into this stuff and you don't wind up in metaphysics at some point, I really think that you're kind of doing it wrong.
Right. And so super
judgmental, but
so with the Sasquatch stuff, like the tree knocking, quote unquote tree knocking, the rock stacking, the I don't know, the coincidence with lights in the woods, the whole thing where in a lot of places where, I guess you could sort of say that people that tend to disappear in areas where these other weird things are seen as well. That might be just because these things tend to be seen in very remote areas where people get lost, but then the Native Americans have their own legends about them, and they have the way that they talk about them. So I agree with you and then when you compare all of that stuff with, like you said, modern UFO abduction stuff, especially the sort of the gray abduction case, not so much the contactee thing, but more the gray abduction era.
Right.
And then when you're looking at the fairy faith stuff, and you're like, okay, there's two. It's okay. So like when I don't want to go off on a long rant here because we're interviewing you, but
no, that's cool.
There's this thing that we look at when. And I don't know how familiar you are with, like, say, the work of Graham Hancock with Fingerprints of the Gods, stuff like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very.
Okay. So the idea that when you're, Hamlet's Mill, when you're looking at all of these disparate cultures all around the world, and you see many similarities, but they're not similar enough for it to have been a diffusion of information from one culture to another. It looks more like there is some even more ancient and more unknown and mysterious source for the similarities. That's how I see a lot of these cryptids / weird stories / the UFO. It's not that they're all the same thing, but there is some commonality across all of them that makes you think that there is some other maybe single source for all of that stuff. I don't know.
No, I mean, and that's a lot. So that's primarily what this book that I'm working on right now with Tim Renner is. It's saying, here's what people are saying about Bigfoot, and here's what people said about fairies. Bigfoot and witches, Bigfoot and poltergeist, Bigfoot and, the modern alien contact experience. And, one of the things that I've always said to Tim is that you've got to look at the company that these things keep. So, so Aleister Crowley just so happens to decide to set up shop on the shores of Loch Ness.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that tracks because we all know that Aleister Crowley was a huge paleontology nut. It doesn't quite track for me. But if you look at these things as having some sort of metaphysical component and these sort of ideas of window areas, it starts to make a lot more sense. And yeah, if you guys want to talk about like the ancient history thing, I spent 8 hours in the car with Randall Carlson, so we can we can do that too.
Wow, that's fantastic. Yeah, we've been interacting with Randall recently on a weekly basis because we're going to the Contact of the Cabin thing that's coming up.
Oh, it's going to be great. He's a great guy.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome. So Kyle and I've been hosting the weekly video conferences that are featuring Randall. So our job is to be the guys that are the interface between everyone that's joining the conference and Randall and sort of keep it all smooth and publishable. So it's been a lot of fun. Randall's hilarious and incredibly knowledgeable. And he likes to give people shit.
I want to squirrel away some time to go on one of those sometime. Obviously now I'm SOL with the twins here, but
right.
At some point,
Yeah.
Bye, honey. I'm going out.
Yeah. Have fun with the twins. Bye.
To hang out with Randall.
Amazingly enough, that's exactly what I'm doing.
Yeah.
My wife was like, "You should go."
Yeah. They don't have twins, but they do have a young boy.
Yeah.
And,
That's nice.
Three
That's
and a
awesome.
half year old.
Yeah. Yep.
So.
Yeah. So, what did you guys talk about, you and Randall?
It's.
8 hours. You can listen to Randall
for 8
hours.
Or not?
What's
not
that?
in person? No.
Not in person yet, but we've talked to him a lot. Yeah.
I don't know. It's just fascinating to be around him because he really does read the landscape like a map as you're driving through.
Oh, yeah.
You can just say, "Hey, Randall, tell me what happened here," and you can point out, like, literally, like, if there's any sort of visibility. Obviously, if you're in the middle of the forest, he probably can't tell you anything. But we were driving from Atlanta to Nashville, so we passed across the mountains and everything, and it was all about like look at these drumlins, and it was just mind blowing, and we powwowed a little bit on some ideas and had some different ideas that sort of come together. For example, I tend to so there's I don't know, I'm thinking of different like anecdotes that I can use to set up another anecdote to use to set up.
Oh, complicated.
There's a great UFO case. I can't remember the date or anything, but supposedly the witness said that the creature came to them and said, "We want you to believe in us, just not too much."
Oh,
That's actually the quote from the encounter.
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's sort of the way that I feel about a lot of this stuff. So I believe that there's something genuinely strange going on in Loch Ness, but I don't think that it's a plesiosaur.
Right.
But one of the things that Randall and I talked about to that end was how he was talking about this concept of a comet sort of streaking across a certain latitude. And I need to get together with him on this. I still have not, but I need to get together with him on this idea because I think it really might have some legs to it. This idea that certain deep water lakes at a certain latitude were the part of a single extraterrestrial event happening, and leaving. And of course, everybody knows what we mean by extraterrestrial on this podcast. Hopefully, not not aliens, just from outer space.
Yeah.
And he said
It could have had aliens
and he was
in it,
talking about how that was associated with the dragon.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I said to him, Randall, are you aware of the term lake monster latitudes? Because Randall is sympathetic to a lot of this stuff,
Yes.
but is not necessarily as deep into it as I am. He's like, no, I hadn't really heard about that. And the term lake monster latitude is actually was actually coined by some cryptozoologists to describe the prevalency of the number of lake monster, the number of lakes that have a giant serpent monster legend in the lake, right?
Yeah.
And I said, so if there's a chain of lakes that are associated with, say, the comet, and the comet is mythologically the dragon, are we talking about the same chain of lakes here, the lake monster latitudes, this idea that somehow the culture has sort of codified that into an actual monster dragon legend?
Yeah.
And that these are the same lakes upon which this extraterrestrial body left these large lakes as well. And of course, where I go, being the sort of weirdo that I am, is what if that sort of belief and that sort of terror actually sort of kind of manifests a half real, half not real literal sea serpent?
Right. It tulped them.
Yeah.
Okay, so where my brain goes with that is maybe the cometary body or extraterrestrial body had some type of viruses that edited bacteria however many thousands or maybe hundreds of thousands of years ago, and there ends up being this crazy creature in there just because it's a completely different isolated area of development.
That's cool.
All along those chains.
Yeah.
Well,
I like that. I think
So just real quick,
Kyle, he's a total materialist, reductionist. He wants them to be flesh and blood.
Yeah, no.
well, no, yeah, okay. So,
No, I'm just giving him shit.
there is, I'm sure you've heard of the, no, I can't even think of the name of these, all the oval depressions in the Carolina Bays. The only place in the world where the Venus flytrap exists, right?
Yeah, I grew up in North Carolina, and I've never been in that area.
Oh wow!
Well,
but you're right. I mean, the Venus flytrap, which looks pretty damn alien.
Yeah. Exactly.
Only
So
grows in the Carolina Bays.
Created by alien DNA or something. Some kind of weird otherworldly creatures DNA or viruses that just edited stuff, and you end up with this completely crazy looking life form in that area only.
Yeah,
So.
I mean, whenever you have these pockets of I mean, it's interesting to me that something like the Venus flytrap hasn't gotten the same amount of attention that people give, the Galapagos Islands and how unique the life forms are there. It sort of does make you wonder if there's something spooky about it. But yeah, I love that idea from a very 1950s drive-in movie theater film standpoint.
Yeah.
Okay, so the other question I had for you, and are we going to take breaks real quick?
Yeah. So we normally take a break every 30 minutes. You want to do that, or you want to go for an hour, take a break? What's up, Josh?
If we could, let's just go on through, and if we could, I'm sorry guys, I didn't mean for us to start late. If we could, is it possible to wrap it up by 8:15ish?
Yeah, I think we can do
that's
that. No problem.
plenty of time.
We do, our show is about 2 hours long. We do 4 30-minute segments. So
Okay, cool. Yeah, is that okay?
yeah, not a problem.
Okay, I'm good to power through. Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
cool.
It's a baby thing. Sorry.
Yes.
No,
I gotta
gotcha.
get
Totally
them
understand.
washed in bed.
Everyone here but me has babies,
Yeah.
including the watcher. I'm the only one that doesn't want to have one. So I got all the time in the world, guys.
Yeah. So my question is that I guess.
Oh crap. Yeah, I meant 8:15 Eastern.
Oh, that's fine.
Yeah,
whatever,
still
whatever
fine.
you can do, buddy.
Yeah.
we're good with.
Still cool.
You sure? Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
not a problem.
Sorry. Yeah. All right.
So, are you? It kind of seems like you're getting to this idea almost like I'm thinking of this idea when you're talking about the way things might be with all of these creatures and all of these strange sort of synchronicities between people's stories and sightings, that we might be talking about, the weave and the woof, like there are two worlds or multiple worlds overlaid, and in some strange anomalous places, perhaps there's an overlapping.
Yeah.
And so we might see things or hear things.
Or, maybe in some places, and maybe when you take some substances, I think that's one of the frustrations. So first of all, I don't think that a lot of these things are necessarily all the same thing. Like the UFO thing is something that's really, really complex. And I think it's a mixture of misidentification and, weird unorthodox terrestrial aircraft, some psi phenomena, maybe even some extraterrestrial stuff. But I tend to distinguish that in a lot of cases from like that sort of alien abduction scenario, because there's not always this transition from, your bedroom outside to a floating flying saucer to, being inside the thing.
Yeah.
But people have difficulty sort of separating that. But I do think that like a lot of it is land based. I do think a lot of it is consciousness based. I think that it is somewhat arbitrary to decide that this is the only state of consciousness where we can gather information that's objective. And I think that one of the greatest failings of ufology, especially, alien abduction researchers, is how they just don't want to touch the stuff. They don't, you start bringing up DMT and they're like, well, let's not talk about drugs because we can't trust what people were talking. And like, but you've got to look at the fact that, I don't know if it's objectively real or not, but the sort of similarities between people who take, psychedelics and the people who have alien abduction experiences is incredible.
Yes.
One of the things a lot of people report when they first take DMT is this buzzing sound, and that's something that occurs before fairy abductions. There's one famous fairy abduction of this girl named Anne Jeffries who said that it sounded like before she was taken, a bunch of flies were buzzing around her. So you have that. You have this, this sort of domed, beautiful otherworldly space that you're taken to, and in some, DMT experiences, you have these short little things that come out and talk to you and play with you. Similarly, in psilocybin,
the machine elves.
You have the time dilation thing, which is a huge thing.
Yeah.
You'd go into fairyland and you'd think it was an hour, and you'd actually spend 100 years. Or you get home 4 hours later than you thought you should, and you find out that you were abducted by aliens or whatever.
Right.
I think that this is, but for some reason they don't want to look at that. They don't want to look at the fact that people literally see gray aliens when they take certain substances. They don't want to look at that because somehow it's scientifically less valid. And it's not to say that people who have these experiences aren't, can't be real straight edge people. I think that there are some environmental effects that we don't even really consider that might have a similar impact on people's consciousness. But until we can sort of cast off this idea that we want to sit at the big kids table, that we want to have lunch with the materialist gang,
right?
You're not going to make any headway, I don't think. You've got to say, look, it's like the nerds jocks thing, right? Like we're all the nerds and we want to hang out with the jocks, but most of the times those nerds really succeed in life. Not to say anything against the jocks, but if you take my meaning, it's like we don't need to be trying to fit into their model, because every freaking day, if you're actually paying attention, their model is shifting more towards a non-materialist model. And I get into arguments with people about this on Twitter, because they say materialism, even if there's psi effects and telepathy, which is, again, is the hill that I will die on, because there's a lot of good peer-reviewed research on that stuff.
Yes,
even if telepathy exists, it doesn't mean that materialism is falsified. And I'm like, you just don't get it. If I have a black and white film and I add one color, I add red, I didn't take away black or white.
Yeah.
But you can't call it a black and white film.
That's
because
right.
It's black and white and red. So it doesn't mean that, it doesn't mean that you don't need to change your oil in your car every 3,000 miles. It just means that there's also telepathy too. And it means that everything is not simply reducible to matter. But, UFO Twitter's not always the best place for introspection, I guess.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was a little bit of a rant there.
No, that was
Sorry.
great. That was fantastic, dude. This whole podcast is about rants. Like this is what it's about. Yeah, you get in here and you're like, God damn it, and then you just flip out on stuff. So
Okay, so
that's
I know
what we do.
I know you have this problem with quantum Bigfoot. I'm not going to talk about quantum Bigfoot, but I would like to talk about the impact of quantum physics. I have a problem with a lot of the interpretations that have come out, like, due to the double slit experiment, they're like, oh, okay, intention changes the experiment. When you try to measure it, it changes things, right? And that's due to our consciousness just wanting to do it. So multiple times on the podcast, I've kind of like tried to give my debunking of that idea. But at the same time, generally what quantum physics has done is remove matter from the equation. Right. Basically, they used to say, well, it's a bunch of little tiny things of stuff that ultimately you can build up and make bigger stuff. And now quantum physics is saying, well, when you get down to the smallest thing, it's not actually anything at all. It's a pocket of resonance in a field. Yeah. There is no stuff. It's just this resonant energy in a field. So it's like everything is vibration and frequency.
So you're kind of saying what he's saying, that like even that model is going towards more and more towards that the material is not with all.
That's what I'm agreeing with you at. But at the same time, the caveat is that doesn't mean that the waveform is destroyed because we're thinking about it. I'm not, I think that there's been some misconception about that experiment, and that's what led to this idea that, oh, if I think about it, or if I try to measure it, that collapses the waveform. That's not exactly what happened in the experiment. Yeah.
Right. I think Schrodinger's cat is something else that gets misunderstood in a similar way as a thought experiment. So you're right. And this is the big problem when you're talking about something like quantum physics, is that it's literally one of those, well, I would sort of criticize in this way because it's sort of like a priesthood in the fact that there's only certain people who are qualified to interpret it and who are able to, be interpreters of this new sort of holy text. So in that sense, it's kind of a little bit like a priesthood, but, when trying to similarly, with a priesthood, when trying to impart these specific complex ideas to people, they naturally get watered down. And with priesthoods, that all got watered down into this, corruption and, really this black and white morality and whatnot. And I think that's sort of what we kind of see with the quantum physics idea.
And even some of the priests got the whole translation wrong. Yeah. And those things were picked up by by more popular culture. Yeah.
I mean, honestly,
by the parishioners.
It's interesting because, I have gone on record multiple times for saying that my biggest problem with a lot of these quantum ideas about there being multiple dimensions and whatnot really does sound like a reinvention of how many angels can dance on the head of a pin.
Yeah.
It's just,
I know that.
It's sort of like us. It's we as, quantum physicists or whatever are sort of creating this mythology around what we're talking about, and it's completely unfalsifiable. At the same time, there's apparently actual science there. I'm just too dumb to understand it. But to me, it always has seemed like, not only the sort of the double slit experiment that you mentioned, but there's some interesting experiments as well that were done for sort of idea of retrocausality as well. And actually, I think there were actually CERN experiments that talked about that certain particles didn't behave in a certain way until after they had been decided how they would behave. Which really, maybe a lot of what we are looking at is just, wibbly wobbly timey wiminess. Yeah. I don't know. But
quantum physics is hard.
Well, I mean, I'm actually looking for this. Okay, yeah. So it was actually a 2015 press release from the Australian National University. It was Dr. Andrew Truscott who said that until things are observed, quantified, and measured at the quantum level, saying that these quantum events are defined by the future, not the past. That's actually in this release. That they exist in this state of abstraction, and at the quantum level, reality doesn't exist if you are not looking at it. Which, as you said, is something that you take umbrage at. But I don't know what to do with it, except to say that at the very least, it says that. I mean, at the very least, it says that materialism is false. I mean, that's what it says to me.
Doesn't that get I don't know I'm trying to think of the word, but doesn't that get to a sort of a, I think therefore I am sort of situation where you're basically saying, like, how do we know anything exists if you're not looking at it?
Well, yeah, it's the old college. I joke about this on Where Did the Road Go sometimes, but it's like the old college stoner thing. Like, how do I know that the red that you look at is the same red that I look at? Yeah. I mean, it's a little bit solipsistic too. Am I the only thing alive in the universe, and you're all just constructions of my existence?
Right. So, like, you got the solipsism idea of, like, the things that are in front of me that I'm observing are manifested right now. Everything behind me is a cloud of probability because I'm not observing it. But when I swing around and look at it, then it becomes into existence. But if I'm not the only consciousness, then there are multiple ones, and then we're all looking at the world, keeping it in existence all the time. That's the whole, like, it's another college stoner thing. Like, the tree falls in the forest, no one's there to hear it. Doesn't make a sound.
I was about to say,
right.
that's the thing that really springs to mind, is that unless so dig this. If things don't matter, if things aren't quote unquote important, and hopefully you'll take my meaning on that. If things aren't important, if they aren't observed, then what does that say about anomalous things being observed?
Yeah.
It says that the medium is the message. In other words, that they exist to be observed by whoever is observing them. That's what it implies to me.
Right.
Again, I don't know if there's any real foundation to that, but it seems to me that would be sort of what we're getting at when we're talking about this paranormal stuff. Because, I mean, far and away, it's pretty obvious to me now that, like, a lot of this stuff has as much to do with the person and, theater and, like, being dramatic for the person's sake, for the witness's sake, than it does actually, some sort of objective idea of, like, little green scientists coming down in metal spaceships, catch and release sort of thing.
There might be some little green scientists, but I don't think that they are the majority of these sightings, right?
I totally, and again, that's one thing. Like, I think that if you look at, I mean, this is sort of an idea that Gordon turned me on to, but if you look at, like, the time depth that we're dealing with mankind, and you look at some of this stuff, I mean, it seems to me like there is a very good chance that there have been, ancient astronaut contacts. I just don't think it's everything, personally.
Right.
Now, you guys might have a little bit of a different perspective, but
No, we are on board with the with that anomalous stuff that we look at in ancient history are due to some unknown ancient advanced civilization, as opposed to, aliens. Now, there may have been paleo contact at some point.
Right.
That's
and there may be metaphysical components to a lot of these ancient civilizations
absolutely.
too. I mean, I think that. So actually, let me flip the script on you guys. Have you guys talked about Coral Castle at all?
Oh yeah.
Is that an open and shut case of being mundane for you, or
No.
Or does it still seem sort of weird to y'all?
It does seem weird. Why? Do you think it's mundane?
I'm a little bit on the fence. I'm probably more on the mundane side, but
I think that he did what he said he did. What I'm saying is, I don't know how.
Right.
And it seems, if he did it in a mundane way, it is anomalously mundane.
yeah, exactly. Like, because I actually had the chance to go there because my wife's family's from sort of down in that Miami area, and you do go in and you're like, it's almost more impressive if he did this by just chipping away as opposed to having some sort of advanced technology, because it would just have been such an undertaking. It's so huge.
Right. Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of kind of reminds me of the argument that surrounds the Patterson-Gimlin video, the famous Bigfoot video.
Yes.
You know, if it's an actual Bigfoot, that's amazing.
Yeah.
If it's a hoax that looks that good, it's also amazing.
It's also really amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. the most enduring hoax of all time. That's impressive too. So but yeah, I've seen videos of lead scouting using, mechanical advantage and whatnot in really compelling ways. But that does some of the stuff you go and you see it and you're like, I'm not entirely sure that that's all that was going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's where I'm at with the whole thing. I haven't seen it in person, so
Right.
I don't doubt that he did it. It's there.
Yeah.
Now, whether or not the stories are true, that he didn't have a crane or that he didn't, but he, the idea that he could have devised a way to move large stones around without the help of machines is sort of depends on what you define as a machine. Like, what did he use to do it?
Right.
If he didn't do it with his bare hands, perhaps he built a different type of machine that we're not familiar with. But
he seemed to have been fascinated with magnetism. Wrote pamphlets on it. So
I think you can still buy some of those pamphlets in the gift
you
shop
can
down
get them.
there,
Yeah,
if memory serves.
and he like defines little experiments that you could run using magnetism, and like he sort of outlines his ideas on what it is. And when you read it now, it sort of looks like I've read some of it, and it's sort of a quaint, like the terminology that he uses or whatever. But still, like his ideas are interesting, and I would love to run some of that. I'd love for Kyle to run the experiments. 'Cause I don't do that. I sit in my tower and work on the computer. Kyle does all the experiments. So yeah, I'm trying. Kyle, run some lead scout on his
I
experiments.
try it at home.
Yeah, he's down there blowing himself up.
Honey, I
Work.
built you a styrofoam castle. It took years.
Hey, that's kind of funny because we actually did
Dog
build a
years.
styrofoam castle, filled it with concrete.
Nice.
There's actually a kind of a construction block that's just an enormous repurposed industrial styrofoam that they sort of impregnate with Portland cement, and then you build it in a big grid, and then you fill it with concrete, and that's how we built our house up on top of the hill. So we did actually build a giant styrofoam
Oh
castle.
wow, that's really good for insulation and whatnot.
Yeah, it's fantastic
Actually, yeah.
insulation. Yeah.
Yeah, I and the thing is, the people who will say that there's nothing to this stuff, it's always amazing to me about people who like joke about magical practice. And you're like, well, have you ever really done it and really tried to believe in it and see what happens? Well, no, but
Yeah.
it's like, well, and similar, I have, well, again, I've spent so much time with him lately. Tim Renner his father was a water witch and would dowse.
Ah, nice.
And he still does the dowsing, not with the Y-shaped, stick or anything, but with the two rods that cross. And he says, I don't know what it is, but
it works.
It works in sort of a double blind way for him.
Yeah.
Where somebody will say there's something in a field, go out and find it. In this case, a unmarked grave. The person knew where it was, and he walked over and he's like, "Oh, it's here." And that's the thing that always blows my mind.
Yeah. We actually had, we got a well drilled out on our property one time, and the people, they come out with the water, with the trucks and everything. And the first thing that happens, this guy hops out and he's got those two rods, and this is like a big company. They come out there with all their equipment, and this dude jumps out with these rods. He starts walking around, and they cross, and he's like, and then he walks in at a different direction. They cross again. He's like, right here. That's where they drilled. Got great water, And
That's fantastic. That reminds me so much of the stuff that you hear about, like, the military spending all this money on advanced technology, and they also have a remote viewer in the other room.
Right. Yeah. It's figuring it all out.
Sometimes
for free.
those old ways just, they just work.
Yeah. So, going back to the Coral Castle thing, like, I don't know how that guy did that, but, you look at someplace like Baalbek in Lebanon. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Baalbek in Lebanon with what they call the trilithon blocks. Like, there's just, how do they move those? And in the 3 blocks that are still in the quarry that have been sort of stacked on top of each other in preparation for moving across the mountain ridge line to the site, they were never moved, but they were clearly being prepared to move over there. One of them is like estimated, no one has weighed it, but it's estimated to be between 16 and 1,800 tons. And you're just like, okay, they made no road. It's just, and they were moving these blocks and building them into a wall that is, getting them 30 meters off the ground. Like, that's just So I don't know how
in
Ed
many
was doing.
cases, in many cases where there's like some massive stone construction that's really ancient that nobody really knows who built it. There's legends that are like, oh yeah, they sang the stones into place in one night.
Or
Right.
whistled them,
It's
and they
so
had a trumpet.
consistent.
Yeah.
I with a lot of my interests have taken a liking to going and visiting Native American burial sites, burial mounds, because I have this working idea, and I have not found. If you guys stumble across anybody who's found anything about this, let me know. But I have this idea that there has to be some long buried journal from some Irish immigrant who comes upon an Indian burial ground in the United States, or even not even a burial ground, it's a ceremonial mound somewhere in the United States, and says, oh, it's, look, it's a fairy hill.
Yeah.
Because they just look so much alike.
Yeah.
And if you look at sort of the time depth, there's an overlap in the time depth.
Yeah.
In terms of how they are represented by indigenous peoples, I mean, for the most part, these North American mounds, indigenous peoples will say, I don't know who built them. We don't know who built them. They were here when we got here.
Right.
Not always the case, but often the case, which is exactly what you find in the British Isles. The sort of activity that happens around them, same associations, their functionality, similar things where they're placed in the landscape, very similar things. And I really think that there's something there. I don't know what that necessarily means. I've been flirting with this idea that a lot of the paranormal is just, it's all about ghosts and ancestors and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
Well, there's also,
I had the chance to stop by on the way back from a gig in Florida. Stop by the Kolomoki Mounds, and sort of to what you're saying about moving a lot of material. It's like 11.5 million gallons of dirt that was moved into the mound, and they've taken soil samples, and they don't know where it came from. There's not a giant hole anywhere. And it's a different composition than the surrounding earth, and nobody knows how it got there.
They're in Florida?
That's in South Georgia.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah. It's actually, I think it's bigger than. I actually think it's a bigger mound. The main mound is actually bigger than Etowah.
Wow.
Which is.
Yeah, we just did a couple of episodes on this stuff. So this is. See, I told you, he's a snake, bro.
So there's also all of the astronomical alignments.
Yeah, I mean,
with the mounds, so
and the precision with which they're done. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you've ever read the Tetragrammaton or any of that stuff, like supposedly from Solomon, like in terms of magic, it's all astronomical. Like you have to plan things out. It has to be on a specific day when the moon's here and other planets are in their places, and it's in these hours are different powers of, different hours or times of day, or moon cycles have different powers that enable different type of, quote unquote magical or spiritual abilities. And so it's like really strange that you look back through there's all this sort of legends or folklore about these abilities, and then you've got a couple of documents that are everything has to do with sort of, maybe people would call it astrology or whatever, but then you've got all these ancient sites that are built to show you when these times are, and it's like, okay, they were doing magic.
Yeah.
I mean, it totally is astrology, and it's kind of funny. It's again one of those situations where you talk to people who really sort of downplay the genuine nature of this stuff, and you say, well, what do you know about astrology? And they say, well, I know that I look in the newspaper and there's a couple, a couple of horoscopes, and it always seems to be a bunch of BS. I'm like, guys, like if you actually just take a year and talk to someone who is a really competent astrologist and follow their work and follow their predictions, it really does unfold like clockwork. It's not, of course, it's, you've got that sort of backwards looking Nostradamus thing, which is where like, well, is that what they actually meant when you saw this in, this being represented? Are we grafting that truth onto it? But I don't think that the day-to-day stuff with horoscopes and astrology really is all that pertinent. But I think if you look at the larger cycles, there's something there.
Yeah. And
it's amazing to me how we can be told that we are part of a larger system. We can be told that the first law of hermeneutics pretty much holds true throughout the universe, as above, so below. You know, the leaf of a tree resembles the structure of a tree, and yet that heavenly bodies really don't have any sort of influence on what goes on.
Right.
Or at least on personalities. Like, I don't know about like actual events, like, oh, this dam broke because, you know, we were in the third phase of whatever, but at least on like personalities and stuff, at least on terms of like the way that people react and whatnot. I mean, I have yet to meet this is sort of tangentially related. I have yet to meet an EMT or a middle school teacher who doesn't believe that their life is going to be hell on a full moon.
Right.
I have not talked to a single one of them. When I talk to them, they're like, yeah, it's a full moon. The kids are crazy. It's a full moon. You know, we had 5 stabbings tonight. I mean, not...
So the watcher,
the teachers are saying the stabbings, and
the watcher is an EMT.
The kids are crazy, but yeah, it's just, you know, or a policeman. Talk to a policeman and be like, "Have you ever noticed?" 9 times out of 10, they'll always be like, "Yeah, things get wild on full moons." And of course, how much of your body is water?
Yeah.
And if the moon can pull an ocean around, why can't it?
That's fantastic. So the watcher is an EMT, and he agrees that is because it is hell. And
nice.
I don't know if you ever. I was a big fan of Art Bell. I used to listen to internet streams of just nonstop coast to coast when Kyle and I would run these machines out in the woods clearing property for people or whatever. So all day you're out there 8 hours, and I would just put my headphones in and turn on this Art Bell stream and just listen to 8 hours of coast to coast while I was driving the machine. And he talked about that a lot. He was like, look, as a radio host of a call-in show overnight on full moons, the weirdness is cranked up to 11. That's just how it is. And you can tell.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I totally agree. I never thought of the moon pulling water around, though, and that's awesome. That's a great correlation.
Pulling our gray matter around it.
I mean, yeah, I wouldn't doubt it. And then you look at, like, you look at sort of magical interpretations. I mean, even if you're not even magically operant, like the number of legends where things certainly happen on full moons, and you're like, maybe there's something to this. You know?
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing for me, and where I think a lot of this value is that, I mean, I know that, you know, y'all tend to talk about alternative history more than the supernatural, but for the supernatural and me, I mean, it's all about comparativism. That's where the real show is, and it's never about saying, you know, it's never about saying that it's all your aliens are fairies and all your fairies are aliens, and or, you know, these aliens are coming from this star system or whatever. I anytime somebody says anything like that, I shut down. Yeah. But if they say, you know, look at this and how this compares to that, it's crazy. I mean, for example, coming back to this Bigfoot thing, are you guys are familiar that there is no shortage of Bigfoot prints that feature 3 toes, right?
Yeah, I did know about that.
Yeah, and they always look so damn goofy when you look at them. They look like, you know, this sort of like 3 big splayed toes with a giant elongated heel.
Right.
And you know, a lot of the flesh and blood materialist cryptozoologists want to say things like, well, that's syndactyly, where your toes fuse together. Well, that's fine if it's 1 foot, but rarely does syndactyly, even in humans, manifest the same on both extremities. But if you look at Native American lore, they're talking about monkeys with chicken feet. If you look at there's one story of a fairy queen from County Limerick in Ireland who was upset that some people had moved into her land, and she actually would turn into a lot of different creatures to scare away the people who had settled near her fairy mound. And one of the things that she would turn into would be an ape with rooster's feet.
Oh, wow.
It's just nuts. And I think that, you know, I've said this sometimes too, and I don't know why people aren't hip to it, but even if all we're dealing with is the idea that we have these, you know, these shared archetypes between people of all different races and cultures that are so fundamental to the human experience that they're shared throughout everyone across the globe, and sometimes they manifest and manage to peek through and have some sort of physical impact and maybe even some sort of visual confirmation, and they're just collective unconscious tulpas, thought forms.
Yeah,
that's like that to me is probably
That's still amazing.
It's still amazing.
Yeah,
and to me, it seems like that's the least of what's happening.
Right.
You know?
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
something like that.
I mean, even if that is what's happening, let's just say that is what's happening. That's astonishing in so many ways. You know, we'd have to change so much about how we even view the universe and about like collective consciousness and human beings in general and our effect on the world if that's what's happening. So I agree with you. That's
100%.
That would
And to me, like I said, that's almost the most sensible explanation. That's the least involved explanation, and it's still incredible.
Yeah. So I know you. So when I was going through a Trojan Feast recently, you reference Jacques Vallée's work a lot, and I've read. I love his work too. What do you think about the way he was looking at the whole UFO situation, where he was starting to get the idea like messengers of deception and stuff like that, where he's saying this seems to be purposefully misleading us. Why would it be doing that?
I mean, I think that time is going to be very kind to what Vallée has written.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of people misinterpret some of the stuff, and not you, but a lot of people misinterpret the stuff in messengers of deception in terms of being like a control idea about like manipulation. It's more like keeping being a regulator, like a thermostat.
Yes, I agree. Yeah.
And one of the things that I know that Terence McKenna once said when he was comparing sort of his thoughts to Vallée's thoughts was that there are certain events that there's a certain side of reality that exists to sort of come up or arise in opposition whenever we become too entrenched in sort of scientism and materiality. And to McKenna, it was even sort of manifest in something like whatever Christ was.
Yeah.
Sort of being a challenge to the way that the Roman Empire was sort of metastasizing and taking over the world. Yeah. And this idea that something like the UFO exists to overtake and to sort of push cultures and societies and peoples back towards the imaginal. I kind of have a similar idea of this myself, that if you can look at sort of religions in general as a cyclical thing, you've got, the pagans, and then then religion comes along to really codify and to set up strictures and strict, not that paganism isn't a religion, but you take my meaning. Yeah. Really strict, structured religions come along to sort of codify a lot of these ideas. And then atheism takes hold, and because as a reaction to how restrictive these religions are. Right. And then paganism comes in and reacts to how reductive atheism is. And then religion comes in. So you've got this sort of cycle. Paganism, religion, atheism, paganism, religion, atheism. And I think we're sort of, right now, I think we're in the middle of that cycle from that atheism to paganism sort of transition. And if you look at, this is coming back to that idea of being sort of a response to the way that people get entrenched in scientism and materialism. If you look at the tenor of conversation around these topics now, it is not like it's been in a long time. Yeah. People are talking about this stuff. People are believing in this stuff. People are accepting other people's experiences more than they ever have. I haven't been super involved in this for a long time, but just looking back, I would venture to say that we're probably in the middle of a cycle that hasn't really seen this sort of superstition. Sounds like a bad term, but I hope you'll take my meaning. This sort of superstition since like 1850, and obviously in some cases that's bad. Because
like pre-World War I, when they were still doing when people were still doing having the seances in their house. It was like we reached that level, and then the World Wars hit, and then everything went to hell. Yeah. I agree with that. Exactly.
And then sort of coming out of that is the mechanistic sort of world wars and loss of innocence. And a lot, sometimes being superstitious is bad. I obviously, I mean, and I think the sort of fake
Knock
news
on
is
wood.
the sort of fake news epidemic in all its forms, right and left, is sort of an outgrowth of how people are willing to follow their instincts more than their heads. But there are also a lot of good things in people following their instincts instead of following their heads. I mean, it's interesting that people, the magical renaissance is a real deal. Like, I didn't really think it was, but I was driving to the beach this past summer, and like, I don't know, like in the middle of nowhere, like 30 minutes outside of Jacksonville, North Carolina, not Jacksonville, Florida, but Jacksonville, North Carolina, which is just the home, to Camp Lejeune. Not like a big metropolis. This is in the middle of the woods. It's like right beside a trailer park. It's a magical shop, and I went in and it was freaking great. It was stocked to the gills. It had really great books and stuff. And I'm like, this is actually the fact that there's this stores out here, and I follow it on Facebook. It's still doing great.
You're like, oh wow, look, there's a barrel of eel's eyes. That's awesome.
I mean, and you've got this is. I'm not saying this politically. I'm not saying this politically at all, but this is like Trump country, and you've got a magic shop.
Yeah,
and those two things don't seem like they should go together. But
but it was the greatest magic shop you've ever seen.
Believe me, I know magic shops. But like. And that's astounding to me. So I think we are, and if you look at, again, like the number of people that I've hesitated to talk to about being interested in these topics and go, oh no, totally, I saw a so-and-so once, or I saw this or that, or I think that there was really something to it.
Yeah.
Even since I've really been involved in this, really involved in this in the past 5 years, there's been a change, 100%. Yeah. And so I think we're in the middle of that cycle, and I think that might be kind of what Belay is getting at, not just UFOs, but just like this other imaginal side of reality in general, edging its way more into our reality to serve as that sort of control mechanism to keep things balanced, so we don't end up,
Right. So then, of course, the next question is like, what in the hell is running that show?
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Because that implies intention behind it, and that something that it has a purpose. And then, so is that purpose just built into the universe, or is it part of our consciousness? I mean, of course, I know you can't answer these questions. But
then you go, as a Christianity, there's a strong urge to sort of let God in through the back door.
Right.
And I think that there is a spiritual, honestly, where I fall into nowadays is there being a spiritual ecosystem that we have. And people hear that and they're like, oh, there's, heaven and hell. And no, I don't mean that. I mean that there's, there are, just like with people on the street, there are good people and there are bad people and there are people who are in between. Or maybe like, those old Dungeons and Dragons affinities, lawful good, lawful neutral.
Chaotic neutral.
Or true neutral, chaotic. I think that's probably, if I had to guess, I would say that that's what we're dealing with. But at the same time, it almost...
The spiritual realm is hierarchical, according to every account that you can look at in history and in modern times, right?
The question is it hierarchical because it actually is objectively hierarchical, or is it hierarchical because that's a human impulse to make it hierarchical, so it decides to represent itself?
Well, you should ask me hard questions.
Yeah. I had this exact same question was posited to me by, I think it was Jerry on the Nox Mente podcast, and he was like, what is reality? And I thought that I'd thought about that, because I think that
that's a hard question.
And here's the thing, like the whole simulation idea feels a little bit wankery to me, because it just seems like that's
more materialism.
Yeah.
It seems like that's, I've seen The Matrix and I'm into computer science, so maybe it's a simulation. Like, I don't
right.
It feels like a very human way of looking at this question as to what reality.
Well, that's just pushing the buck,
it's kicking the can out of the universe and into the other one or whatever.
If I had to be honest, I'd probably look at more Eastern ideas like creation wanted to observe itself or something. I feel like that's a lot more elegant way than saying like, oh, well, what we've got to do is we've got to level up out of this reality into the next reality, and then it's turtles all the way down.
First the elephants, then the turtles all the way down.
Yeah, exactly. But there's a lot of stuff about that idea that I do find parsimonious.
Well, I had a conversation with a good friend of ours recently. We were, it's one of those party conversations where they're partying, and he's like, okay, bro, so what's up with the simulation idea, right? So we start talking about it, And I think the point that I was trying to make to him is like, look, don't take the word simulation literally.
Which is something that I'm very guilty of.
Right.
Every time I hear it. And it takes me a second to find my footing.
Right. It doesn't necessarily mean because I agree with, I can't remember who said it exactly, but going back to the UFO stuff, there's a famous quote from somebody who said, look, I think that, that these things, when you look at all the cases and when you look at the way that they interact with us and the way they act, it seems like they are coming from a place of pure information. And the fact that they can interact with us implies that we are also a place of pure information.
That sounds like a Mac Tony's quote.
Could be Mac Tony's, yeah.
Yeah.
So going with that idea, like this can be a place of pure information. Like Kyle was saying with quantum physics, when you get down to it, there is no material. There's just frequency, right? Frequency and vibration. So what you end up with is numbers that can describe all that. So that's pure data, right? It's pure information. And so a simulation, so my friend he asked me, he was like, well, why, how come we look at it and in some ways it seems to act like a computer program? And I'm like, well, because when we design simulations, we design them to look like the real world. So the correlation may be the other direction, right? Our simulations are designed to look like this world. That doesn't mean when we look at this world and we see it looks like a simulation that it means it is one.
Right. Right. It sort of reminds me of this idea that Terrence McKenna had, that if you could actually if you could trip for 10 years in the same, under the same influence, would you navigate that reality just as well as you navigate your normal consciousness reality?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
If that was it's just, we're never there long enough. So
all right, watch, are you going to try it? Try it, bro. Trip for 10 years and let us how it goes.
I heard, you probably heard this too, but I heard on Graham Hancock's latest Joe Rogan interview that apparently, the DMT guy, I'm drawing a blank on his freaking name, but Rick Strassman.
Yeah, Strassman,
with the Japanese researchers, managed a way to actually keep the DMT high going.
Yes, right. Yeah, they got some kind of controlled drip. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's to me that's like the opening. It's like the prologue to a more interesting version of Star Trek. It's like, oh, here we go. Now we're boldly exploring new worlds.
That's true.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't mean to poo-poo. Well, I kind of get obnoxious, I'm sure, sometimes about poo-pooing my interest in space and extraterrestrials and stuff like that. It's not that it just doesn't seem to. I just, I look at space news and I'm like, okay. I mean, I have a little bit of a gatekeeper thing, not to the extent of being like a flat earther by any stretch of the imagination, but I have a little bit of a gatekeeper issue with, the organizations that were being told what's out there beyond the atmosphere.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And that's not me saying, I'm not a moon hoaxer. I'm not, this or that or the other, but I remember seeing, the picture of the black hole, which is cool. It's a great scientific moment, but it's kind of is that?
I kind of felt the same.
What is that?
Yeah.
Really,
Yeah.
you kind of know what I mean. It's kind of like, what is this? This doesn't have any real bearing on anything, I don't think,
Right.
And again, it's,
unless it gets closer, it's not a big deal.
It's just I believe, and please somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe a lot of the photos like nebulae and whatnot are colorized, right?
Well, yeah, they have to do a sort of a frequency correction, right? Because they're looking at them with radio telescopes and stuff, which we can't see radio waves. So what they do is they take the frequencies of radio waves that they're seeing and they sort of say, okay, this set will be blue and this set will be green and this set will be red, and then that way we can look at it and see visually what the radio information is telling us.
It's basically I think of it in terms of like audio. If you had some sound
audio
in ultrasonic that we can't hear, you just lower the frequency that it's audible.
Right.
Now I can't wait for people to say that Josh Cutchin's a flat earther or doesn't believe in space or something.
Yeah, I know he's talking about turtles and elephants.
But I do like to engage with that because I think that's the funny thing about the flat earthers and why they've gained so much traction is because if you are interested in any of these subjects, you get where they're coming from on some level.
Yeah. Well, I get their mistrust of these organizations.
Yes.
For sure. Mm. Never a straight answer. No Americans in space anymore.
And what that says about gatekeepers and whatnot.
I also think that in some sense, I think the flat earth things, it looks like a psyop. okay, so,
you mean the flat Earth thing itself looks like a psyop?
yeah, like, well, at least some of the big names that are pushing it, like so. I don't know if you listen to Grimerica, but they did an interview of I can't remember the guy's name, a flat Earth guy, and like he's very psyopy. He's like got this condescending, like I know more than you, sort of. He sounded like Richard Dawkins, but he's a flat earther. It was, you know what I'm saying? He had the same way of talking to people, like you're an idiot. I know more than you. Like use your adult. Yeah, David Weiss. He was. Yeah.
I think a lot of these things that get pushed on us. I mean, because I've yet to meet someone who genuinely thinks that way. And, you know, I think that there are a lot of things in our world, a lot of divisions and divisiveness that are deliberately engineered.
Yeah,
because most people I meet are nice people. Most people I meet aren't mad at me if I misgender them. Most people I meet aren't Nazis.
Right.
Most people you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But we only see the worst of us, I think, on social media and whatnot. But as far as the disinfo thing, I've heard some people, say the same thing, that like it's a mixture of pushing that agenda to make people on the fringe deliberately look stupid, and the idea that it's just trolls involved too.
Right.
I have a friend who theorized that the Tom Belong to the Stars agency was sort of a psyop to study how to weaponize feelings of religiosity in the UFO community among people who are not inclined to spirituality. Because there's plenty of religiosity in the UFO community, but it never seems to grab onto those people who think that it's nuts and bolts craft until you look at some of the TTSA people. And I've put a moratorium on myself from complaining about them, but there are some that this is still on my Twitter, so I'll go ahead and say this, but I took an excerpt from an article that was just really glowing about the TTSA thing, and I replaced Tom DeLonge with Marshall Applewhite, and I replaced TTSA with Heaven's Gate, and I replaced Disclosure with The Ascension.
Oh,
and
yeah.
it reads like a cult thing. It's like, I believe that they're pushing the state back, but this is when it's going to happen, and we just need to, really, we should all trust that they know what they're doing. And it's like, it's really creepy. Yeah. Now I know that there are some very level-headed people in TTSA, and I've talked to some friends of mine off the air. And in candid situations where there's something to this, you can't ignore it, but there is a lot of wankery, I think, around the To the Stars Academy stuff. But there's some of it has teeth, and we'll just see. Yeah, where that leads.
Well, I mean, like if you can break it all down to a nutshell, the Disclosure people are basically like, the government's been lying to us this whole time, so we need to get them to tell us the truth, and they're totally going to tell us the truth this time, guys. Right? Like that's that's.
I think it was Greg Bishop that might have said, and I think he apologized for it, so I don't want to get anybody in trouble. But,
go ahead.
But he said, and it's an apt metaphor. It's like the beaten housewife taking her husband back in when he presents her with a bouquet of roses.
Oh yeah, wow.
It's like I know that you always wanted, I know that you always wanted to go to Biloxi for the weekend. So
yeah,
I'm taking you to Biloxi. I'm sorry I gave you a black eye. It's
right.
Like,
yeah. Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I mean,
it is a strange thing,
and it's just like anything. There's going to be I think there's going to be a mixture of real truth in there and some astounding stuff. And I think it's going to be a mixture of an agenda that needs to be pushed. I'm just ready for something to happen.
Yeah.
Of course, this is where people write in and say something has happened, but I'm ready for something a little bit more impactful to happen.
Well, now that we're on the topic of disinformation, I just this is kind of going back to this point you were making earlier, and I'll get to it. It's like you said, we look into alternative history, and looking at all these religions and all these legends, or secret societies and stuff like that, you start to get this idea that there's all this hidden information, all of this hidden knowledge. And it's like, why are they hiding it from us, right? After looking into it for a long time, I started to get the idea that they are not hiding it from us. They're hiding it for us. Because if it was out there in plain sight, that was obvious, it would be destroyed by those who want power over people.
Yeah.
So the knowledge is hidden in plain sight, and it's put into these memes that people that don't really will never know what it means. They are always repeating it and repeating it.
Yeah, parables.
So that eventually somebody who comes along that can decipher it will be able to know this truth or whatever. And you were kind of describing the cycles that we go through with, from paganism to religion to atheism, and sort of like this cycle, and like, who's putting out this information or who's organizing this. And I think that it might actually be an extremely ancient tradition that's being carried on to organize this sort of hiding in plain sight knowledge to protect it for people in the future, while also hiding it from the people who are seeking power.
Destroy it now. Yeah.
I think that's one option. The other option too is that if you ever, I don't know if you guys ever read Chris Noll's Secret Sun blog.
Yes, I'm familiar with it. Yeah.
I mean, he's obviously onto something. Sometimes I just wonder if sometimes there are certain truths or certain symbols that aren't so pervasive that they don't just constantly emerge from this whole thing. Like, reality doesn't just keep on throwing things up that are certain truths. I mean, if, in other words, it's not that the yellow butterfly that landed on your car today represents your dead Meemaw, but it's rather that there's a symbolism behind yellow butterflies, and that it's just not to say Gaia, but it's just like reality communicating with you in a certain way, as opposed to it being specifically for you.
Yeah.
And I think there are some things like that, some ideas and whatnot that are truths that just can't be repressed. But I mean, I'm attracted to the idea that we are not as in control of things as we think we are in general.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I find that idea really attractive. And I think that there are some people who fight that, and I think there's some people who definitely do a pretty damn good job of wresting control from whatever this other thing is. But I do think that that existence is symbolic, and it's just up to us to try to parse it all out.
Yeah. Well, man, this has been fantastic. I know you gotta.
It's been too short. I'm so sorry.
No, it's all right. It's totally cool.
I got to get back to babies. But let's do this again, please. It's
absolutely.
So much fun.
Look, and Sarai can't get mad at you because he's also coming on the show in a couple of weeks. So
I know, right?
Okay. So
so thank you so much. For coming on,
give people your social media. Tell them where to find you, what you're working on.
JoshuaCutchin.com is a website, at Joshua Cutchin on Twitter, which is not super inventive, I know. I have 3 books out, Trojan Feast, the Food and Drink Offerings of Aliens, Fairies, and Sasquatch, The Brimstone Deceit, which is all about smells and a lot of the common smells that you find in the paranormal. The latest one is Thieves in the Night, which is a brief history of supernatural child abduction. It's the scary one. And then I've got another book coming out this fall. Well, I say book. It's probably going to be 2 volumes with me and Timothy Renner, called Where the Footprints End, which is all about, I was about to say obnoxious Bigfoot. Anomalous Bigfoot.
Sam Squatch.
Yeah, right. All about anomalous Bigfoot and sort of things that don't fit the giant ape in the woods model. So.
Nice. Well, I can't recommend Trojan Feast enough. That book is fantastic.
Thanks so much, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I've got to I want to get the other 2, and I'm going to go through them. You need to get them on audiobook, man. You need to get some.
I know. I've had some people bug me about it, so I actually need to try to find a way to make that happen.
Yeah.
See.
And also, what's the name of your new band, and can we find it?
Funk Cake. Yeah.
Funk
you can find
Cake.
It. I actually, this is kind of, maybe none of my musician friends listen to this stuff. I actually ended up replacing one of the guys, so I'm not on the website yet. Funkcakeband.com.
Awesome.
And there's social media links all over there.
All right.
Sweet. All right, man. Thank you so much. Hopefully we'll do this again.
Guys. Sounds good. Take care. I had a great time.
All right. Good night.
Night.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, brothers of the Serpent podcast. Fantastic interview with Joshua Cutchin.
Absolutely.
In the 100 by 100 by 100 time cave hole.
Hello.
Yeah, so
It's a cave.
I would like to thank all of you listeners for putting up with the audio quality in the time cave hole.
Yeah.
Since we've been doing the Contact at the Cabin Zoom conferences, where we require better internet than at our house. And this week, we just left the studio set up at the time cave hole.
Right. Because we have no internet right now
Right.
at our house. And
But I've been told that those cell towers are being fixed
yes,
as we speak.
that's right.
So we should get our LTE back.
Right. So the next podcast you're going to hear are going to be coming from a tent somewhere in Colorado. They'll be great.
And the
quality.
sound quality will be amazing. Good point.
Yeah, that should be a lot of fun. I've been talking to Darren from Grimerica about the equipment he's bringing, and so we're coordinating on that. We're going to be bringing some podcasting equipment. He told me that there's going to be a room in the lodge set aside for podcasting equipment and for podcasting. So hopefully we'll set everything up there, and then we'll probably do some roundtables. I think it's going to be awesome.
Yeah.
It's going to be a lot of fun.
So yeah, we basically decided, and I don't know if you already said this because I was doing other things, but I'm bringing my small interface
Yes.
and my computer and mics and mic stands. So we will not be doing handheld sampler. Well, we'll have some of that.
yeah,
But
he said that they're bringing that stuff too.
Okay.
So I am going to bring my sampler, so we may have some audio from that.
It will be an amalgam of
Yes.
various audio quality
Yeah.
type stuff. And we're also thinking about doing a restarting an old, never published TV series we call Every Hour on the Hour.
That's right.
That we used to make with a handheld video camera when we were on road trips.
Yeah.
And we were thinking about testing that out as a little podcast, a video podcast gimmick.
Yeah. I already told History Shift. I was like, bro, we're probably going to be sending you a whole bunch of little clips of Every Hour on the Hour while we're on the road trip. And you could put it together and upload it to YouTube. He was like, man, that sounds awesome. I'll do it. So
Yeah,
he's
so
all in.
Every Hour on the Hour is it's basically a whole season of very short episodes. Each episode begins on the hour,
Exactly
on the hour,
the hour.
every single hour of the extremely long road trip.
Right.
And they're only like, a minute long, maybe 2 minutes.
Yeah.
So you're talking a 15-hour trip. We're talking about 15 minutes, maybe 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Of a video podcast.
Right.
Of us just becoming
Progressively more
tired and
tired and
delirious.
hypnotized and weird.
It's actually pretty funny.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
We might be doing that.
Yep. Yep. So look for that on YouTube, possibly, on the Brothers of the Serpent YouTube channel. But let's get back to this interview with Josh. That was a fantastic interview. He says he wants to do more. He was unable to stay for the entire 2 hours, which is fine.
Hey, we got an hour and a half. That was great.
Guys got twins. You know?
Yeah. Hard.
Yeah. Some of his comments on Twitter were right before the twins were born. He was like, everyone who keeps telling me that twins are hard, I know. Stop telling me twins are hard. I had to respond. I was like, twins are going to be hard, but also freaking awesome because twins are badass. So,
Yeah. So I've definitely got a lot more questions for Joshua. And I'm looking forward to talking with him more because it seems like he was really sort of, and of course I haven't read any of his books. Russ has, so I'm a loser. But it seems like he's sort of scratching the surface with this initial conversation on like the bigger picture.
yeah, like he was feeling us out on how we think about stuff.
Yeah,
maybe.
and kind of like, well, just kind of like, he's still obviously developing the way he thinks about the world and is open to, things being different than the way he thinks about them.
Oh, yeah,
he's
absolutely.
open to his mind
Yeah.
changing on these things, and there's a lot of questions and uncertainty.
Yeah.
which is great.
Yeah.
And I've listened to.
The main thing I like about him is that he's just and I don't know the guy. You know, my experience with him is just years of listening to podcasts with him on there as guests. He was a regular on Where Did the Road Go for years and years. And the main thing I thought about Josh is that he's just a top-notch thinker.
Yeah.
Right? So he has not been doing this paranormal stuff for very long. Like he said, 5 years, right? You know, it's not like he's been looking into this stuff for his entire life and he's like in his 80s now and he's got all this wisdom to drop. That's not what's happening. He's a regular, kind of a normal guy, and then he sort of got interested in a few things. He had some experiences and stuff, but then he decided to like attack the book. He was writing the book, and then that just he just exploded onto the scene because no one had ever done any of the correlations that he made in that book.
Wow.
Okay. That was a whole, and then that's why he did the next one about smells, because he was like, look, there's this whole thing with weird food in all of these accounts. And that's why you got to read A Trojan Feast, because it is Trojan in the sense of like the Trojan horse. The food is a placeholder for something else, and it always signals change or the beginning or the end of the experience. If you look at ancient mythology and stuff like this, when they're talking about going into the other world, you eat something from there and then you're stuck there. He goes through all that stuff, and no one had ever done any work on it, and he just blew everyone's mind with it. It was fantastic.
So is when he did that book, is this like, does he talk about ayahuasca or any of that?
Yes, he does.
Yeah.
He talks about that kind of stuff too, but he's just talking about, look, we have these accounts, and so the person is like, this happened to me, and I got abducted by greys, or I encountered some, in these fairy tales or whatever, not fairy tales, but these encounters with fairies or whatever, and you see these accounts of food being given or drinks being given, and across all these cases. And so he was basically making comparisons and showing you like, look, there's something going on here, and it may be symbolic. So I agree with you that he's still sort of figuring things out, like all of us are, but he hasn't been doing it for very long, and he's just a top-notch thinker, and he's able to go around corners of boxes that other people are stuck in.
Yeah, great person to have conversation with. That was really cool.
Yeah.
I'd like to throw, you gave a couple of anecdotes from, your experiences, and he's like, oh yeah, that's a common thing. And I'm just like, dang, I want to tell him like all kinds of weird experiences that I've had when I was a kid, and see what he says. Like, are there correlations? That's just really cool.
Yep.
So maybe we could even, I don't know, get him in on some topics that we discussed. We did a little bit, but
yeah.
Get his thoughts on a lot of
he told me, when I was talking to him back and forth beforehand, that he's interested in the ancient stuff too. He's just his forte is the Fortean stuff. Yeah. I like it. His pun, I was trying to laugh at it, but he was like, it doesn't matter. And I'm like, yeah, because we're talking about nothing is material, right? This stuff doesn't matter. Yeah. I got it, guy. So yeah, like I recommend, again, I've mentioned this multiple times, their podcast, Where Did the Road Go? First of all, Soraya, the guy who runs the show, is also a great thinker like Joshua. Soraya is a little bit more cautious in his thinking. Josh is one of those guys who will he can think out loud, right? Soraya will listen to what you say, and then you'll have a one sentence thing that just explodes everyone's minds, right? Josh will like sit there and just think out loud. And since we were here in a place where we had better internet, we actually just left the video on when we were talking to him, and you could see it happening. One of us would say something, and he'd look up and he'd start thinking, and he's talking about it, and he's thinking, and he's like, and he's looking around, and he's actually engaging with the subject as he goes and just working his way through it. And then he's making correlations to things that he's researched and so on and so forth. And it's just fantastic to talk to him. So, yeah,
that was really cool.
Yeah, and
I also would like to continue on the old quantum physics conversation with him. That wasn't the purpose of the interview, so I didn't want to keep hammering on that. But
stop being wrong.
I don't know if I'm right. I just like
stop being wrong about quantum physics.
That's just one of my big obsessions. Is everybody knows that listens to this podcast, I get mad about people talking about quantum physics in certain ways.
Yeah.
And he does too. That's like, I had no idea, like the whole quantum Bigfoot,
Yeah.
do not say quantum.
Yeah. Do not say quantum big. So of course I'm like, tell me about quantum Sasquatch. So
But the weird thing is, like, I've been reading this Dean Radin book that you
super
got.
normal. Yeah.
And he talks a lot about the quantum situation, and I just think that there's so much about that is it's this
Here we
weird
go, ladies
dynamic.
and gentlemen. Here
it's
we
this
go.
weird dynamic. No, that where like all of the implications of it are like do point to certain spiritual or otherworldly or multiple overlapping realities or possible dimensions, but
Overlapping time caves.
overlapping time cave holes.
I knew those were involved somehow. Yeah, man. I don't know what to make of quantum physics. Like since you like sort of sat down with me and were like, look, here's the real measurement problem, and this is what's really happening. Like, I'm like, okay, I accept what you're saying with it. I still think that there is something weird happening with consciousness, again, because of the tests, and Dean Radin goes through some of that stuff with in Supernormal about, like changing random number generators or whatever.
Yeah.
So, but I think the thing that's fascinating about this and about most of the subjects we discussed with Josh is this specific thing is that it keeps you, it doesn't do this to most people, but if you're paying attention to it, it keeps you questioning what's really going on, no matter what's happening.
Yeah.
Right. The measurement problem is something that it keeps the uncertainty is there because this thing exists, and like I see this, this may be going back to a sort of a. I'm not going on a whole like what's it called? Intelligent design or whatever, but this idea that the universe is a puzzle that's designed at every level from the macro on down to the micro, the smallest possible thing is designed to make you go, what the fuck is going on here? And then the closer you look at it, the more you realize that everything that it appeared to be when you were just sort of not really paying attention but glancing at it is not correct.
Yep. I love that. Everything is backwards.
Yeah.
Yep. That's the fascinating thing about things, quote unquote, on the quantum level and the measurement problem itself is that it's brilliantly designed in such a way that there's this seemingly impassable barrier where we cannot look at the nature of things when there is no interaction with them.
Yeah.
So the moment there is interaction, it becomes something, and that's the only thing. That's the first thing or last thing, whichever way you want to look at it, that we can measure.
Yeah. Or it's almost
But
like
we know that there's something beyond, right? That's cool. That's just really cool.
like you're saying that there's a sort of a designed-in barrier. Maybe not designed, but there's just however, for whatever reason, the way it's working is that like we cannot actually see the fundamental building blocks of things because in order to see those, we have to bounce other fundamental building blocks off of them, and it changes their nature by doing that.
Yeah, so it would be really interesting and sort of ironic and awesome at the same time is that the only way to solve the measurement problem is through psi, this other approach to how the universe works, through consciousness, through meditation, through this otherworldly thing. That's the only way you can observe that quantum particle or whatever they call it, quantum wave something.
Yeah.
Is to do it through consciousness. Like consciousness can do it without physically interacting with it.
Yeah.
So you could measure it in that way. Like that would be crazy. So it's like the universe itself is leading us to fulfill the physics on one end, and there's this barrier at the end where we just cannot do it with physics anymore.
Yeah.
The only way to get there is to go the other direction.
Yeah.
So it inevitably, no matter which direction you go, like if you were sort of, John Anthony West's ancient Egyptians pursuing the path of the spirit in all of these strange ways, then like they may have done this and realized like, oh, we can't learn everything about the universe only in this way. So now we start having to build all these massive structures and do all this crazy stuff in the physical to overcome these physical problems too. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like no matter which
path you choose, you find that at the end of that path, you discover you need to go on the other one.
Right.
That's really cool.
That would be freaking awesome. And the Watcher wants to know, Watcher says he would love to hear Joshua's take on the bells in the tower.
I saw you mention that earlier, and I chose not to bring that one up because that's one that, like, because I have the audio, I always want to be able to play it for people, and I just don't have the audio with me. But yeah, I would love to, like, basically play him that soundbite and just, like, let him. Yeah.
I thought of the same thing though. Like, you know, he would probably recognize, like, even from the story, like you're sitting up in the tower and like suddenly you hear these bells.
Yeah, man, that freaking.
And you start talking. Russ starts talking to him. You can hear it in the recording. He's like, they start to go away. He's walking around. He's like, where is that? Where is that? Ding, ding, ding. And they kind of fade off and then stop for a while. And he's like,
Are you still there?
Are you still there? Ring, ring.
Yeah, like right next to me, dude.
And he's like, oh my God.
That was really close.
That's crazy. But he would probably know. It's like, oh, yeah, that's like a very common fairy folk.
That happens to people right before they vanish without a trace. I thought of that when I was telling him about I was like, man, I'm freaking glad I didn't follow that thing. Will-o'-the-wisp out there. Yeah. I still can see that in my mind's eye. That I remember that night seeing that blue thing drift through across those windows out in the yard.
Yeah. You saw some Marfa lights, but in Georgia?
Yeah. Yep. That's freaky. I didn't know to be scared of it at the time. I thought it was just somebody out in the yard with a flashlight, which was also...
Are you supposed to be scared of it?
Well, maybe not. I don't know.
Be like a child.
Yeah. Oh, wow, what is that? Well, you got anything else you want to talk about with the interview?
Quantum physics. No, I'm just joking.
Stop getting quantum physics wrong. Well, I mean, I have some, we didn't get to do this at the beginning because we had Josh, so I've got some, listener communications.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it.
All right. We didn't have space for the news this week, folks. Sorry about that. We don't have the keyboard with all our sound effects. We can't.
We had a massive lightning storm that took out a bunch of transformers.
Yeah.
Power was out in various places and also
knocked out our
service. So
yeah,
we've complained about that enough. You guys know this is not the optimal situation, but here it is. I'm just filling in space while Russ looks up other things on
my phone.
His phone.
Yeah, I got it. Okay, so you guys remember last week when I read the comment from Wojciech, right? Baalbek, who said we couldn't pronounce his name.
And he was right.
He was totally right. He commented again on the last comment he posted was on the previous Contact the Cabin conference call with Randall. So now he's posted another one on this most recent one, and he says, hey again. Thank you for discussing my last comment, and I appreciate your efforts to pronounce my name. Once or twice, you almost made it. Smiley face. I'm also glad that you came back to the subject of the moon, and it seems that the great Gandalf, Randall, shares my assumptions that the moon may have a cavity inside, but to not make things too sweet, I will add some bitterness to this to comment by complaining that you failed to ask the great magician about the second part of my theory that the moon may be like a vessel which is not fully filled and our Earth attracts the honey filling, thus making the Earth side facing denser and leaving the cavity on the far side, which in turn fixes the moon's position and then the denser side always facing the Earth. But I will fully forgive you if you keep pressing Randall on the subject. He may eventually spill the beans or honey someday. Best regards, Wojciech.
He keeps alluding to the idea that he's going to be spilling the beans.
Right.
But he doesn't.
Yeah, that's what Randall keeps saying.
Yeah.
So,
sorry, bro. Forgot to ask him about the honey. But I was thinking about this, after Russ read me your email, and I was like, but if it was full of honey, it wouldn't ring like a bell.
Yeah.
But if it was full of water, or even half full of water,
Or wine.
It would. Or wine.
Yeah.
Because my analogy was like, you know,
wine glass.
The
Yeah.
wine glass half filled or 3/4 filled or however much you fill it, it will, the wine glass itself will still resonate, and it resonates at different frequencies based on how much liquid is inside. So I was thinking about the lunar something thing that they dropped and hit the moon, and it rang like a bell. So that's kind of cool,
Yeah.
you know?
So he also sent us an email, same guy. He's like, "Hello, brothers of the Serpent. I begin to feel like a stalker. However, I don't know how a proper stalker should feel like. So just let me know when you find my emails and comments too frequent or too disturbing." When writing my last comment, I felt tempted to call Randall Winnie the Pooh and accuse him of eating the honey from the moon, hence the cavity inside. Probably the evil force of the One Ring tempted me, but instead I called him Gandalf, and you must admit that this nickname is more fitting. And I do think that Randall is the Gandalf of our times, who tries to save humanity from evil forces. While most of us are just little hobbits thinking only about filling our stomachs, or orcs mostly preoccupied with waging wars. And he goes on, he explains some stuff about some interesting things about Saruman, which I'm not going to go into here, and Masonic stuff. But then at the end, he says, "Kind regards from a nice Polish city whose name you don't want to know, Wojciech." And so, listen, I'm telling you, Wojciech, the reason I didn't read that stuff is because I still need to think about all that stuff you said. You're sort of comparing Lord of the Rings and a bunch of other things, and I need to look at it more closely. But I wanted to get those your two comments in there into this before we go to Contact the Cabin. So I want to tell you, first of all, that the Contact at the Cabin conferences are for people who paid to go. And so Kyle and I have been asked to host them and sort of be facilitators for the people who are in the conferences to talk to Randall because they've paid money to go there. So I didn't totally feel comfortable asking a question from somebody who's not going to the conference in those particular things, because those were just set up for people who did pay to go to interact with Randall. But what I'm telling you is I am going to talk to Kyle, and I will talk to Randall about this when we're there, and we're not like basically taking up we're not getting in the way of anyone else's time. You see what I'm saying? So we will talk to him about it, and then we'll let you know what he says, or if we get it recorded on a little sampler or something. I just wanted to let you know what was going on there and why I didn't push the issue into the whole liquid. So
yeah, and to be honest, like the whole experience of being invited in to this group of people who are planning and organizing this trip has been nerve-wracking to a certain extent. Like we were guests.
yeah.
At the Zoom conference, raising our hands and asking questions when we were prompted, to suddenly being sort of like the gatekeepers of the questions that other people had. And it was just like, wow, like it was nerve-wracking to like, I don't want to be a gatekeeper between these other people's ability to ask questions. So we've been trying to not be gatekeepers.
Yeah.
At the same, but what they asked us to do was to make it flow and make it publishable material.
Right.
And we felt like
It was a little bit
extremely
stressful.
obligated to monitor what people were saying in the chats and make sure everybody had a chance, if they wanted, to come on and speak with Randall, ask him their questions, while also allowing Randall to go on his flows without being interrupted.
Yeah.
So it's been quite an experience. I'll just say that, trying to navigate that.
Yeah, when you got 24 or 25 people in there and the chats are going crazy and they're all asking questions, and we're reading all that and trying to listen to Randall and keep up with what he's saying, and then trying to find good places we can
interject.
We can stick that person's question in right here, or we can bring this person on to ask this question, and you got to do it in the right spots to not interrupt Randall too much. And
yeah,
so it was a lot of fun. It was terrifying.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying is like, that's why I couldn't in good faith, I could have pretended like it was my question, but just for my own sense of well-being, I couldn't in good faith ask a question that came from somebody who was not there because they had paid to go and all that stuff. So I just want you to understand that. But I am going to ask Randall this question and see what he says about it. And I'll get you the answer.
Do you
one way or
think
another.
that if we brought peanut butter to the moon, that we might be able to combine those two things in a tasty manner?
Can we make peanut butter and honey foldovers on the moon?
Maybe the dark side of the moon is peanut fields. We don't know.
That's true. All right. That's all I got.
All right.
I mean, we have other communications, but most of them are requests for us to look at information and then respond, which we can't do right now. So to all of you who sent us
we
emails,
will look at that information and respond later.
yes, we just can't do it today. So
We are leaving for the trip basically tomorrow night.
Right.
Which would be early Friday morning.
yep.
Thank you guys very much for your support. And thanks for listening to the podcast. All of this is about seeking all of the mysteries. And I really appreciate all of you listeners.
Taking this journey with us.
Yeah.
So trying to find out what the fuck is going on in this universe.
Keep sending emails.
Yeah.
We love it.
We do love it. And like I said, all of you who have sent emails with information, pictures, videos, we will get to them and we will respond to them. So thank you guys so much.
Yeah. You can get a hold of us at brothersandserpent@gmail.com.
That's
Send us
right.
emails. Check us out on the website, brothersoftheserpent.com. There's t-shirts, snakeskins page. There's the Encyclopedia. There is the glossary of terms. All
right.
kinds of tidbits of information.
That's right.
Small pieces to the hilarious puzzle.
That's right. And you guys can follow us on Twitter at Snake Bros with no vowels, SNKBRS. Also, share the shows any chance you get. Give us reviews wherever you can. We appreciate all the good reviews you guys have been giving. Thank you so much. And we will continue to read your review comments and other comments on the show because we love them so much. Unless if you send it to us in Polish, I probably won't be able to read it. But if you just give me your Polish name, I still won't be able to read that, but I'll try. So thank you guys so much for all that. And also, don't forget to donate to our pyramid scheme.
That's right.
Send us to pyramids so we can figure this stuff out. Or, die trying.
And thanks to everyone who has donated.
Yes, thank you guys so much. And that's it. The next you hear from us, we will be in Pagosa Springs. Good night, Adamu. Get back to work.
Thanks.